Hi folks, we're back with Dr. Jan Prins, a world-leading research scientist in swimming biomechanics and technique analysis. We're here to understand more about the backstroke today to help you get the most out of your stroke, maximize your speed, and swim faster. So today we're going to be sharing some of our FM visuals along with Dr. Prins' high-speed motion analysis to highlight the areas that impact your performance. And let's dive right in. Welcome, Jan. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, John. Real pleasure. Real pleasure.
It's been so exciting to do these shows with you. You're absolutely amazing. The insight that you're giving everyone is phenomenal. We're going to get into this a little bit, but in your program, you have books coming out and you've got a video series, right? And you penetrate these topics to understand much more, if I'm correct, than we're going to hear today.
I mean, we've been fortunate enough to put some time into this high-speed stuff, so we're seeing some very subtle things that they're almost impossible to catch with however experienced we are with stroke mechanics, watching it from underwater. The things that we are picking up with the high-speed stuff is very, very interesting.
And in the naked eye would be very difficult to just catch it in a moment, right?
Absolutely.
I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started. And the first thing we're going to look at is some still pictures that we have here. And so this is a backstroke, our 200 level breakdown of the backstroke. We have a 100 level, 200 level, and a 300 level. So this is kind of the mid-range right here. And then we'll show you the 300 level. This just shows you a side picture. Now here's the stroke map on the 200 level. We're going to look mainly at the arms and the legs, but you can see, again, we have the head and the torso here that we can look at. So A stands for arms, H for head, T for the torso or the body, and L for the legs. And what we've done is done a breakdown into what we call phases. And so the first phase is A0. That's the above surface recovery. Then we have A1, which is the below surface recovery. A2 is the gather, A3 is the press, and A4 is the thrust. All right, and then over here in the legs, we'll have L1, L2, L3. And because L0 would mean that the foot's out of the water, and we don't want to see the foot out of the water. That's why I don't have an L0. We have L1, right? And that's the below surface recovery. So it's going from the top of the water near the surface down, right? That's the recovery. And then we're going to have L2 is when you bend your knee on the way up, and L3 when you're going to straighten that knee and bring that foot up. All right. Now we're going to go from the 200 level to a 300 level breakdown, and you can see how many more pieces there are. These are called the components, and you can see this is just the arm cycle itself, but you can see all the different components inside that 300 level breakdown. And even from there, you'd go into, for instance, A1A here, the entry, and now you have the elements inside there of angle, bend, location, speed, intensity. So what we're going to be looking at are, if you look at dimension 1 here, you have the structure. Before that, we'll have motion, right? Hydrodynamics, force, timing, and blending. We'll go through that in animated fashion in a moment. But first, we're going to dig in and go over to Jan and see some of the science behind what's going on here.
So here comes the swimmer, you can see, and the first drop is the lull that occurs right at the entry, and you see nothing's happening. Here's the entry. You can see the body is flat, so nothing's going on. Histogram is going to go up and down. It's an active visual feedback on how fast the swimmer is swimming. This is the velocity, the hip velocity over time. So this is the time that has expanded over 2 strokes. Here's the entry of the right hand right there. And so you see it as we scroll through, you see 2 strokes. And that's all we can film, because this camera that's filming this only can capture that field of vision.
Okay. And when you refer to velocity, can you explain that for the audience?
Yes, velocity is speed essentially with the dimension of direction. If you say speed, everybody knows that the direction is important, but velocity is more of a technical distinction.
That's a really important distinction too. So when we look at this, just to orient our whole audience, we have this little light in the upper left. There's some lights on him. Can you tell us about what we're measuring?
Yes, those are LEDs. There's a battery pack that we tape, and they have wires that feed in. And each of these are LEDs, light emitting diodes, which is the way we can keep track. The computer then can recognize the light from the dark background and automatically digitize and help us keep track of what's going on. We can generate almost 250,000 data points because we're filming at such high speed. So can you imagine going one point at a time and manually digitizing it? It'd be impossible.
That's amazing. So we're going to measure, in this case, when we're looking at the upper right, folks, we're looking at the speed of the hip, right? That right there, that light on the hip, how fast that's moving forward. So we're measuring the speed and the velocity because moving forward, right? We're moving the velocity that measuring the velocity of that hip.
Okay, so here we are with this dip here is at the entry, so nothing's going on. And then there's a increase with the catch. You see how the catch goes? And if you look at the bottom picture on the right, can you see the catch very clearly right there?
That's in the A2 area for us.
Correct, correct. And now we come to something very intriguing, and that is this little dip here. And you can see there's not supposed to be a dip because that's still a continuum of the pull. It's supposed to be holding the water and pulling, continuing the whole sequence of the arm pull.
But so that's a dip in the speed, right? That's a dip in the speed up in that velocity graph.
Yeah, dip in the velocity. Exactly, it's going slow. See, if we go back here and look at the histogram, it's gone up right here with his catch. And then all of a sudden we see a little drop. You see that? And that dip in the graph is it's clear. You can really see that it's going down. And the whole question is, why on earth in the middle of the stroke do we see this dip? And this is why filming in all three planes is very informative, because if you go over to the top left hand, you see how much resistance his deep kick has generated.
Is that because he bent his knee on that?
Yeah, he's let his leg drop. He has bent his knee and let his foot go very low, much lower than he should be. So the frontal resistance is certainly affecting his speed. And this is the subtlety of filming at 100 frames a second.
On that right picture on the bottom, you would never be able to pick that up.
No.
You can't see it on the right there at all. So that's why it's so important to have all three, right?
Exactly. And it's all synchronized, so you can tell exactly what's happening with each position of the hands and feet. And so what the message for coaches, John, would be careful about trying to kick too heavy a kick. Even though you may be kicking well and generating a lot of propulsion, you got to be careful that you don't let your feet sink too deeply. And then, of course, now we see the classic increase in velocity as the follow finished. And right at the end, down here, the end of the stroke, you can clearly see from the bottom is where you see the peak. Now, you very astutely noticed that his straight line is somewhat compromised. You see, his entry is a little bit too high. Instead of being in line with his shoulder, he's trying to enter too far behind his head. And you saw that immediately, John.
And that also, if I'm right, just to make sure. So when we look at the core, you can see that head is slid over a little bit with that too.
Yeah.
And then you can see on the right side, sorry, on the left side, this is the left arm in here, right? Yes. So on the left side, he's overreached across his head a little bit. Exactly. And then if you look at the hip and the whole side of the ribs, he's got a little bit of just a tiny bit of a bend there, and that's going to cause a press.
Yes, exactly. And so this is a Division I swimmer, internationally ranked swimmer. But no matter how fast you are, you always can get faster.
You'll never be perfect, but you can always get better, right?
That's exactly it. And so that's the finish of his right hand, follow through. And then he starts again, and then again you see this lull because nothing's happening.
Wow.
And then his pull with his left hand, interestingly, John, you see is not as high. See, he's weaker with his left hand. And that's another thing that a coach can pick up from here. You can see, you said, hey, look, my right hand, your right hand is generating this amount of peak velocity. Your left hand is not doing as much. That's
why it looks like he's almost slipping a little bit there.
Could be where we're filming. It's a little far away to see exactly what he's doing, but he could be slipping. The other thing also, John, to remember is that these peaks could be flatter. The flatter they are, the more impulse, like we talked about at length.
It's held on a longer period of time, is that right?
Precisely.
So if it peaks up and comes back down, if you were to push that out, it would hold it longer, that speed, or
Exactly.
sorry, that velocity moving forward.
Exactly, and that's what we talked about in my articles that just came out in American Swimming. We talked about this business of impulse with freestyle, which can be taken to all the strokes. It applies to all the strokes.
And you'll be able to find that right in the fast track with Dr.
Correct.
Prins. So now going forward from there, we see that dropping back off again. So he has a big difference here in his right arm versus his left arm pull.
Exactly.
That's very interesting.
Exactly. So we see one complete cycle. That's how much we can pick up in this frame of reference.
So we're going to go ahead and I'll share my screen on this, and we're going to go in and look at it from another angle here. Here we are. The first thing that we're going to be looking at here is what's called the motion pattern. This is generally when people are looking at swimming, they're kind of looking at just a general motion pattern, and it's harder until you break it down to see the different compartments that occur. And the way we break it down has to do mainly, from our standpoint, is the skeletal motion. So we're looking when things bend, for instance, the elbow bends, things like this. If you have a fast track membership, you can go right in here and you can use this yourself to see all of our stroke starts and turns. So let's go in here, and this is the structure, and you can see how we've broken it into parts. This right here is A3, where his left arm is. We're going to go farther. So here we go, A0, that's his arm is up in A0. Okay, so A0 goes, what's called the above surface cover, it goes all the way over like this, and then you go down to A1 in the water down here, A1. Now we're going to A2, and this is one of the pieces we were looking at.
Right, and we now know, John, that the better backstrokers are now pressing backwards earlier. They're not letting their hands sink as much, so there's no down, up, down movement. It's more backwards,
coming back a little, possible. Right. So it would kind of cut this off up here and come back. Is that right?
Correct, exactly.
Almost curve that. Got it.
But I think it's a good thing to teach kids at the beginning to make sure their hands sink to a certain depth, because if they start their pull too soon, bend their elbows too early, their hands are going to be grazing the surface and they're going to be slipping.
And even popping out. That's right. That's right.
Exactly. So I think it's a good idea to say, let your hands sink a little bit, but now start, and as you get more advanced, of course, that will be easier and easier to work with. But for starters, I'm free. Now, one of the things that I think you're doing very well is you're turning the palm as early as possible to head backwards, and that is excellent.
And so what we're trying to do is, and we'll see it in the hydrodynamics, trying to get on that front of that pressure field. Now here we're in A3, and then we're going to go back into what's called A4 right there.
The palm's constantly facing backwards, which is very important.
Right. Yep. And we got that from Doc Counsilman as well, to always keep your hand facing backward or downward somewhat, right? Got it. So from here, we're going to go over to the next portion where we're now looking at the hydrodynamics. And now you can see exactly why, right? You're trying to get on the front of that pressure field. So because we're causing propulsion, the pressure fields here, they're building up. And so he's pushing on the pressure field here. And now back here, he's pushing off it. That's what's driving him forward really heavily.
That's where we saw in the graph the peak velocity. And what we'd like to do in a general sense, John, is hold the peak from earlier.
Got it. So the earlier we can get it, right?
Exactly. See that? That's what we want right there. Because the swimmer we used for this example didn't really have an earlier impulse. You know, the high velocity was only at the end, which is what 99% of backstrokers do. Just like freestylers, they're taught to speed up at the end, thinking that that's the only place that you need to generate maximum propulsion, and that's not the case.
Right. So we've got to drive force, right? Drive force and burst it, basically. Is that right?
Early. Yes, earlier. The earlier, the better.
And then when we get down here, we want to take a look at these legs, because that was one of the things that, right, that came up was
Right.
when the leg comes down. See this leg that's on his left side. Notice how that leg is straight in this picture. And what happened with his is they bent that, right?
We bent it way too low. He bent
And
the knee.
when he did that,
the
he got a
knee.
lot of
Yeah, and
resistance there.
yes,
In
exactly.
this
His
case,
foot had sunk quite a bit, and so the frontal resistance jumped right out.
so frontal resistance is when the water's coming back like this and you're causing resistance against it because something's sticking out. Parasitic drag, is that correct?
There's all kinds of names for it, but yeah, if you say parasitic, the implication is that something is not supposed to be there.
Exactly. Got it. So now we're going to go over here real quick. We'll take a look at our force. And all this is the green section. Green stands for setup. So take a look at all the green. A0 is green. It's setting up, getting ready. So you're not doing any propulsion during A0. A1, again, setting up. A2, the main job is setting up, right? And then once we get that, we're going to see here A3, and now that's where that really heavy duty, we're starting to get a lot of pressure on there. That's a propulsion, main propulsion phase. And now you can see it's turned darker blue and you're getting even more, even with an arrow back here. So it's saying you're going to get a burst there and throw yourself down that pool to try to get residual movement as well.
Very good.
The next one, we're going to be looking at timing. And let's just stop for a moment here. And we're going to see these spheres. So the next sphere that's back towards his feet, that's going to be what's called the future. Then you have a sphere right at his hand, that's current. And the green sphere over here is the past, where he was before. So this is where he's going to be in the next frame. That way you can match where one arm is compared to the other, like this. Okay, and so that's very important, making sure that those two match, and that your timing is on, because that makes a major difference when your timing is off. And then the last one we're going to go to here is we're going to look at what's called blending. And that's everything all put together, a synergy of all the different layers. And this is actually how it looks to us.
Very nice.
Okay. So you wouldn't want to teach it that way, because that would be very confusing. There'd be too many subjects talk. So we pull it into layers that way. Now, if you want to get the ability to use or see these anytime you want, you can get a membership to our fast track. You just go in here to fluidmechanics.net, click on the FM fast track, go to the demo, and you can sign up right here. Buy it now and get it on the fast track. You can get all these tools. And in addition, over here, if you want to see more about Dr. Prins and his videos, you just go right over to experts inside the fast track. And you can also in the demo see this. And here's his articles, which are absolutely phenomenal. So it's right up there and it's ready to go. And then down here, you can purchase a membership to see Dr. Prins Freestyle Biomechanics, this full 16 video program, which is absolutely phenomenal. You'll love it. Jan, thank you so much for being with us today. This is really, really interesting. We really appreciate you being here.
Oh, pleasure, John. Thank you.